Welcome to episode 24 of the Trash Talk Business Podcast. If you are in the waste industry, junk removal, demolition, deconstruction, hauling trash, I don't care. If you are here, that means you want to grow, scale, get out of this business, and you've come to the right place. As always, I'm joined by my buddy Casey Bubba Lawrence down in the great state of Texas, temporarily in Florida, because you got to take a vacation every now and then. Casey, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we have a special guest named Brandon Fong, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be getting into the nuts and bolts of what he does, what he has to offer, and go from there.
I love it. As always, we just jump right in. Brandon, tell us who you are. Why were you put on this planet? And let's just get talking trash.
All right. Well, Andy and Casey, so great to be here. Thanks for having me. Excited to share anything that I can to help support everybody that is doing some epic things in the world. So I love how you asked that question of why am I here? Because I think that's kind of at the core of everything. So I've had a bunch of experiences recently that have led me to discover that I believe I am here on this planet to create a more deeply connected world. If I look at all of the threads that have gone out throughout my life from 7 years old to 16 years old and all those other things, I've noticed that this theme of connection has appeared. And when I say connection, I mean connecting deeper with myself. I mean connecting with other people. I mean connecting other people with resources that they should know. And I think that today, especially COVID, has taught us that the opposite of connection is loneliness. And I think that if you look at business from a really high level perspective, there's several first principles that really drive the needle on other societal problems. And if you look at people being lonely or suffering from not feeling like they belong or not feeling like they're worthy, that stems into health issues, which stems into issues in all other areas of your business. So that's really why I believe I'm here. And I have several ways that I do that, and I'm expanding that. And, I have the podcast where I get to connect with high level people and share the wisdom from that. But I can dive into more of the origin story, but at the core, that is what I do. It's going to stem from connecting with other people and supporting them and helping them to develop relationships with themselves as well.
No, I love it, and I know you, but I want to hear from a listener's perspective, right? Because the connection with others, right? That's why I want to have you on the podcast. That's why you're here. Is I know you a little bit. I've started to watch your content. I know your parents from local networking, right? So people are like, oh, I don't like to know local networking. It's like, no, I go to this breakfast every other week. There's 40 people in the room. I've known his parents. Actually, one of the first people I ever had a one-on-one with was your dad. We went and got
awesome
cheeseburgers over at Wahlburgers one day, and then found out from him, right? Him and your mom went from running a Chinese restaurant at a food court at a mall to being financial advisors. I'm like, how did that happen, right? And then the last couple of years, last year or so, your mom like talks you up, right? Your podcast, this, and it's like, okay. And then I looked you up, and then one of my guys, Fabio, who does my content, was like, Brandon Fong, and I was like, yeah. I was about to say Brandon Wong, which is interesting because that's Casey's like best friend, who also does a bunch of stuff down in Dallas. And like 2 weeks ago, when I text Casey, I was like, hey, we're gonna have Brandon Fong on the call. It came up Brandon Wong, and I was like, no. He's like, why do we need him? He's like, I can call him anytime. Anyways. So if I call you Brandon Wong, it's 100% because of
all good.
Casey's
All
buddy.
good. I've heard every rhyming and derivation of my last name in middle school, and I'm sure you can imagine where that goes.
Right, and what's interesting about your parents is like they're with Prime America, and they're like Rick and Stephanie Fong with Prime America. Like they talk just as fast as you, so I know where you get your fast talking from. But my point here, when I'm going to land this plane eventually, is that right? I go to local networking. Right, I meet your parents. I'm not a consumer, right? We don't do business together. They're not buying junk removal from me. I'm not buying financial services from them, but I trust them. I know them. I like them, right? The three basics to form that connection of people you want to buy from. And they told me about you. I looked you up. I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? And I looked at some of your content, and some of the people you had on your show, and I was like, oh man, this guy's killing it, right? And now I want to have an opportunity to have a conversation with you. But not only that, selfishly, do I want to learn from you? I also want to drive that connection, right? You were talking about those three buckets of connection. It's really that third bucket of connection, which is access, opportunity, education from you, right, to the people that listen to our podcast. Because I'd argue that where you are in your world and where a lot of the people that are doing junk removal are naturally going to come across each other. Right, and that's the opportunity that Casey and I have, and why we put this podcast out in the first place, is to connect with individuals throughout the world, right? We have listeners across the world now, but individuals throughout the world that want to grow their business and don't dedicate a lot of time to it, but know they need to dedicate a little bit of time to it, but they need to leave, right? If they're going to dedicate an hour to listening to this program, that they're going to get some nuggets that are actionable today. So that's what I want our conversation to focus on, right? What are some of those actionable things today that people in the field need to be doing so that they can get into the truck, right? The goal or the way that junk removal works, I've seen this for 15 years now, is you got your goal to get into the truck. You want to turn this into a business, right? And then then you want it to be your main career. And then you get to the point where like, well, now I want to get out of the truck. And most people get stuck in phase 3 or step 3 or whatever we're going to call it, right? You're in the truck, you're running your day-to-day, maybe you have a second truck, but you're still in the truck. And you basically bought yourself a job at this point, and you want to make 6 figures and go on a vacation, but you haven't figured out how to make the leap from 1 or 2 trucks to 8 to 10 trucks, or 4 to 6, whatever that sweet spot is for you.
And this is where you come in. And this is applicable to any small business. And this is
any small business.
The one thing we're very adamant about is get out of your business, not just physically, but talk to other people, other business owners in different industries, because you can still take their, tips and tricks that they use or that you learn from them and apply it to your everyday business as well. Talking to you, Brandon, like, you're not in junk removal, but Andy and I have a ton that we can learn just from speaking with you. And it could either apply to our junk removal industry or it could apply to our other businesses, but it's all that knowledge and gaining the knowledge and then deciphering which goes where after that. And I think in this industry, you get stuck in surrounding yourself with just like-minded people in your industry. So you're kind of limited on a lot of things.
Yeah, just to build on top of that, one of my favorite quotes that comes up on my show all the time is, you can't read the label from inside the jar. And the first time I heard that, I was like, it kind of makes sense. But like picture yourself inside of a jar. If there was a nutrition facts label on the outside, there's no way without another human being outside of the jar that could read that label. And I think that, especially what you're talking about, Casey, it's like, if you're only having conversations with people that are in your industry, that are thinking at your level, it's very hard to see and get the perspective that you need. And sometimes the things that are the most valuable are the things that we take the most for granted, right? They're the things that we're like, oh yeah, like I went to Andy's Young Guns event the other day, and like the energy and excitement and passion that he brings. Like, Andy probably very often doesn't view that as like a superpower or a strength of his. It's just like how I show up and do things, But like most people if you look at, going back to the connection thing, there's this TED talk by Yuval Noah Harari. I always screw up his last name, but he talks about how like the human species evolved. And like the thing that separates the humans from everyone else is our ability to collaborate on large scale without creating absolute chaos. It's like you put 10,000 monkeys inside of a stadium, it's just going to be just nuts. There's no order, no chaos. But like you look at like a TED talk, or like right here, right now, like the only reason why we're talking is because tens of thousands of other humans have developed the technology, the microphones, the Riverside.fm that we're recording. It's like, so all this is possible because of human collaboration, and we need that other people's perspectives to unlock things that are the greatness inside of us. And so absolutely agree with what you were saying, Casey, as far as leveraging the wisdom of other people that are outside of your industry.
No, so Taylor's our producer. Taylor already earmarked that, right? The jar comment, right? Can't read the label from the inside the jar. That's the challenge. And I would argue that's probably the challenge with a lot of industries. I have a jeweler that I work with, and we're in a round table together, and her and I got talking. She's like, well, we can't leave the store for more than 2 or 3 days at most over a weekend because we have to be in it. I was like, but you don't. You have to build connections with your customers, with your vendors, with your employees, so that you aren't, or you don't become your business. I think the challenge I see a lot is, right, I talk about the 4 people that matter in your business. There's only 4 people that matter, right? And that's your customers, your employees, your vendors, and your investors. And investors are anybody that invests their time, their effort, or their money into you becoming a better practitioner at your craft. Those are the people that matter. And the challenge is, especially in junk removal, especially when I first started, I invested 90% of my energy into customers. I wanted to acquire them. I wanted to make them happy. I wanted them to find me more customers, right? And then over time, you're like, oh, I need to focus on building my employee force, right? Oh, now I need to build a healthy relationship with vendors because vendors are going to be the ones that connect me on these next level projects or these next level, even next level thinking. Like, hey, this is a better way of doing things. This is a smarter way. This is a more efficient way of doing things. And then eventually your investors, you figure out over time, who are the investors in your business, right? Because there's going to be people on Facebook and friends and family that take from you. They challenge you. They tell you you're not going to make it. They tell you what you can't do. Or you have people, bloodsuckers in your business. They're taking and taking and taking. And they're not making deposits within you, right? So I look at those are the four groups of people that matter. And some people can self-select out. You can always quit. You can always not be a vendor. You can always not be a customer. And you can also always not be an investor. If you want to be somebody that doesn't make the business or the practitioner better. So that's how I've broken it down. I've broken that down in the past. Casey,
my favorite.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my favorite type of person is the warning consultant. They're not really negative. They're not telling you can't do anything, but all they tell you is be careful because. Well, just be careful because this. They don't have the balls or guts to tell you not or to do something. They can't commit. So that's your first warning. They're not committing to either side. They're just going to keep warning you like, well, it is a big risk. Or, hey, you don't really know this person. Or, hey, you don't know what's going to happen. And if you notice, those kind of people, all they do is warn you. But then you look at what they do, and you're like, well, if you're warning me all this other stuff, where's this research coming from? What's the basis of it?
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about who you're taking feedback from. It's really because everybody wants to give their advice, but you have to be careful with who you're listening to. So there's several things that I think about for this. I came up with an acronym. You wouldn't had find this because I haven't shared this that much yet. But I looked back at all the best relationships that I've had in my life and all of the worst relationships that have happened in my life that I had to cut people out or whatever it is. And I realized that all the best people in my life, they followed an acronym, and the acronym is REAL. They're real people. They're respectful. They're enthusiastic, and they're appreciative, and they're loving. And so that's one really important thing is that you're surrounding yourself with real humans. That's the core of it. Whatever they do, obviously, if they're at the core, they're real. But the other thing that I think is interesting to think about is that when people are providing you feedback, they're reflecting their own insecurities on you, right? Because what happens if you become successful, what does that do to them? Maybe that represents them not doing the thing that they were supposed to be doing. Maybe it represents that, hey, Andy or Casey become more successful. Maybe they won't be my friend anymore. So you have to be mindful of the fact that people are always expressing their unconscious biases on everything that they say. Another quote that comes up on my show all the time is probably my favorite quote of all time. It's by Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. And I know it's like, whoa, you just slapped me with a philosophical Carl Jung right here. But it's so true because if you look at any of the behaviors that are happening inside of your life right now, if you look at the structure of how things happen, it's like the language that we're using, English, has parameters around it, right? So if we were speaking in Russian, there are certain words that I can't use in the English language that we might be able to use in Russian or whatever it is. So language is what shapes your thoughts, which is what shapes your decisions, which is what shapes your reality, right? And so it's really important to be thinking about what are the unconscious drivers that are actually creating all those different things. And so that's one thing that I'm always interested in is not fighting the Hydra, right? Because if you fight a Hydra, you keep cutting off the heads, more and more are going to come above it. But what most people don't even realize is that if you really wanted to defeat the Hydra, it's not about defeating the Hydra at all. It's about defeating the Hydra's mother, which is actually Echidna. If you study mythology, Echidna is the monster of all mothers. She was the one that created Cerberus. She created the Hydra. And so when I look at, this is getting really esoteric, so you pull me back down to the ground level after I finish here. But I think it's really important that whatever problems you're facing in your life is you want to look for the real root cause. Because if you're fighting at the surface level, if you're fighting Hydra's heads off, or if you're even defeating a full Hydra, the problem is going to resurface until you uncover the core of it. And so I think it's really important to understand your unconscious drivers and the narratives, because that is absolutely what is affecting your decision making, which is what's affecting your reality. And so it's one of those things that I've just observed from all these high level people is they have observed what their natural strengths, what their natural skill sets are, and they've realized that they've been fed narratives from a very young age, or they've adapted narratives that are in their mind that limit or inhibit their progress to move forward. And so being conscious that, first of all, they're there, is really important. But then the next phase is being mindful of that once you understand that it's there, you can be way more mindful and construct a more effective narrative that will give you different results in the future.
No, I love, so I'll break down Barney style, right, what you're saying, right, which is, because you're just, okay, so you're speaking, so what's interesting, you bring this up, and you didn't even know this about me. I'm writing a book right now called Words Fucking Matter. Use language that serves you.
100%.
Okay, and the back jacket of it starts by saying that throughout our day, we have 70,000 thoughts a day that lead to 7,000 spoken words. However, we think in words. So it is what you were even talking about earlier about building the connection with yourself. What you tell yourself is to be true, right? So like Henry Ford said, right, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So what narrative you tell yourself is important. I love, right, there's that adage like, fake it or fake it till you make it. I hate that, right? Face it while you make it is significantly different. Right now you're saying, hey, I'm going to walk into the world with the strengths I have while I make it, right? And I tell people all the time, like, yeah, I'm figuring this out as I go. Even with this podcast, Casey and I were like, hey, there's no podcast specific to junk removal, sole proprietor practitioners, or small LLCs, right? There's the 800 guy junks, bohemians of the world, right? And there's the waste managements and the Republic services. But what about everybody else? And that's why we came up with this. We're like, hey, let's do this and see what happens, because we're willing to put ourselves out there. Just because no one's done it doesn't mean it can't be done. And just because we don't know if we have listenership doesn't mean that we're not going to have it, right? And we have, in the last 3 or 4 months here, been able to get listenership. We get people that reach out to us. We get the opportunity to have these connections that we wouldn't otherwise have, because we didn't let those voices in our head tell us what will or will not be. We decided, no, we're going to do this. Yes, we have to avoid the pitfalls of the world, but we're going to go out and do it because we believe that we're on a righteous path, and we're going to acknowledge things along the way, but we're going to take risk. And without risk, you can't get into business. I love what you said there about people projecting their own their own insecurities, if you will, on you, right? And it's not just, hey, when Casey is successful, not if, but when Casey is successful, how's it going to impact me? But it's also people saying, well, I can't do it, so therefore he can't either. No, that's not true at all. And that's what I've seen in my life. I have friends and family that have not supported me because they couldn't do it, and they want me to live in their view, right? How they want me to live. Go get a job. Go do this. Go do that. It's like, well, no, I'm not you. If you need those securities, God bless. Not for me. And even now, when I have people that challenge me, it's like, are you using objective information, or are you using your insecurities to dictate what your comfort level is? And that's a challenge. So let's talk to that. For those guys and girls that are first getting in this industry and they don't have that necessary support system internally or externally, right? What do you tell them to take that the leap of faith, per se, right? And not just faith, like you talked about faith earlier, right?
Yeah.
Don't be ignorant to the world out there. But what do you tell them so that they make the decision, and the calculated decision, to go out and be successful?
That's a great question. So I'll answer that. I'm answering at a really high level, and then you can bring me back down to like the tactical level. I just want to comment really quick because I can't miss this. One of the people that I interviewed, his name is Robert Tennyson Stevens. He wrote a book called Conscious Language. If you're writing a book about words, you have to check out Conscious Language. I was at a business event, and this guy, this business event is held on a yacht, and this guy that owns the yacht, he's been retired for several years. He's 30 years old, and we're on the yacht at night, and the waves are bobbing. And he casually says to me, yeah, I completely eliminated the words I want, I can't, and I need from my vocabulary. I'm like, that's really fucking interesting. What is that like? How did you do that?
What were those again?
I want, I can't, and I need. He's like, I eliminated them from my vocabulary. And there's maybe some more. And I'm like, okay, what was that? And he's like, oh, it's conscious language. And so, of course, I devoured conscious language, and it's really interesting because he talks about leveraging your language to think about the difference between, okay, hold on, let me just back up. And I'm sorry, this is a tangent here, but if you say you want something, that immediately means that you're placing distance between you and the thing that you desire. It means that you are not that thing. By saying I want this, that means you do not have that thing, right? So you can immediately substitute I want with I choose to. I choose to blank. That is more empowering language that allows you to actually claim what you want. And so the whole book goes through a bunch of that kind of stuff, and we dive into it when I interview him on my show. So I didn't want to pause on that because I love that you're writing a book on language, because it is the most fundamental building block of like our reality. Is like, it starts with our language. It's like the stories that are in our head, how we communicate things. Like it's an overlooked thing. And then I'm going to keep saying one other comment. That's the thing you got to rein me in as an interviewer, because I got to keep saying one other thing. You were saying something else that I think is really important. It doesn't matter what business you're in, whether it's junk removal, like the people that we're talking about, is I think it's really important perspective shift to look at your business as not the actual thing that it is. It's not actually junk removal. It's not actually whatever it is that you're doing. It is a vehicle that allows you and gives you opportunities to look at yourself deeper, right? Because like when you face that thing where your employees don't show up, when you face that thing where you have a client fall through, that is really just providing you with an opportunity to look deeper and learn more about yourself, right? So it's like, for me, business is like spirituality, right? It's like, oh shit, now I have to look at my own shit. Like, why did this happen? And how do I learn from this experience? And so, when you come up with those opportunities, having that mindset of like, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this is really interesting. So those are my two asides. And now I will answer your question is what is basically, you had asked, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, what advice would I provide to somebody that is looking to start building their business in a way that's in alignment with them? Can you just clarify? Because I know where I want it to go, but I don't remember the actual question. I want to make sure I get it.
No, that's it. That is it. What are those first thoughts to jump off?
Yeah. So it goes, again, I was going to say really high level. This is really interesting. So the first thing is another mindset perspective, and it's worthiness. And it's a part of the conversation that is not part of the conversation that's so important. If you do not believe that you are worthy of what you want to create, you will never create it. And it's so important to realize that your worthiness is non-negotiable. You will never be more worthy than you are right now. So you already can, and there's no amount of achievement, there is no amount of validation, there is no amount of stamps or letters after your name, there's nobody patting on your shoulder that will ever give you a level of worthiness that you don't have right now. And so that's really important to understand that, because lots of the times that what prevents us from doing the things that we don't want to do is that some part of us feels that we're not worthy of it, right? Like if I gave you $100 bill, the value of $100 bills is $100. It's not negotiable. You have a value inside of you that is non-negotiable. So it's not a tactical thing, but I think that that's one of the biggest things that sabotages so many people is they don't really believe that they're worthy of operating the business. They don't believe that they're worthy of making six figures. They don't believe they're worthy of making seven, or they don't believe they're worthy of charging this amount, right? And so like all of that stems from you needing to believe in yourself and that you are worthy, and you will never do anything to influence that besides sitting and sinking deeper into that. So that's the first thing I'd say.
No. So, and then I'd argue, right, to bring it down to, bring it down to a tactical level, right? If you say you are worthy, you got to be able to qualify that. Hey, I'm worthy, and these are the reasons. I've done this, and this. And if you're not worthy, you either got to, you have to qualify what you've done. And if some people really aren't there yet, right? I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, as Mark Cuban would call them, right? Where they're like, oh, I got this. Well, no, you have to still qualify it, right? Are you worthy? It's one thing to believe it, but it's another thing to qualify in a way where, like, okay, yeah, you're right, you got this. And then that drives into affirmations, right? I am worthy because X, Y, and Z. Because you also have plenty of people that are out there, entrepreneurs, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, that get out there, stamp it, say, you know what, I spent my $130, I have an LLC, I have a business, and therefore people should give a shit. But it's like, well, if you don't have a product or service that people are willing to pay for, if you don't do it in a way that, helps move society forward, like then you're really not worthy, right? And
I would challenge that, because there's an inherent value of being a human, right? Like there's that, and you can separate that from the credentials. Obviously, the credentials and the stuff that you can provide is super valuable. But I'm talking about like the sometimes people don't even view themselves as a worthy human being of doing the thing, and like that's a bigger problem.
Oh no! I agree with that. I know that 100% there. You're worthy, right? But if your business is not successful, you can't go back on your laurels and say, well, I got this. I'm good enough. Why am I not successful, right? Look at the guy next to me. Why is he? Where you have to objectively answer those questions. Why am I not successful? Oh, I need to do this, this, and this. Why 100%. Does he have this and I don't? Okay, I have to look at that objective, right? And yes, worthy. We are all worthy, right? We are worthy. There's something, I hate the word weakness. I only use the word strengths, right? We are worthy because we have strengths, and that makes us who we are. And now, what are you going to do with those things to go out and prosper? But then
100%.
also have the reality check that you also have to have a solid business. And I'm not saying you have to have accolades and a degree and a business plan. No, but you have to be able to sit back and say, okay, this is what I've done. This is what I'm doing. And I'm going to get there by continuing to do these things and starting to do these things and stopping some of these behaviors. So actually, while we're there, go ahead, Case.
Well, it also goes back to their why. Like, why are you doing the thing? Because a lot of people, I'll be honest with you, my first experience in business ownership, it was because I had no other choice, and I was at a very dark place. So I said, F it. Like, why not? Let's try this out. I had support. I was with my mom, my stepdad. So in my mind, worst case scenario, we fail. Well, at least I got paid for that year, and I'll just figure it out as I go. But as I continued and I found my passion, I found my why, like even to this day, people are like, well, what do you do? Honestly, I hate telling people that, I'm in demolition. I like telling people, like, I'm a business owner, because I wasn't happy even after my last business. And when we exited, I still was like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. As long as you keep driving and keep learning. And I feel like a lot of people, maybe their first experience in business ownership, they don't know what they want to do. They don't know what they are. They just know that they're in the situation that they're in right now, and they have to drive through it. So I think finding out what your why you're doing it, what is your end goal, doesn't mean you have to do the end goal, but what is your exit strategy if you have one? I think that's very important.
Yeah. Just to build on top of that, Casey, there's another framework that I developed recently. I haven't shared it that much yet, but the acronym, it's another acronym, and it stands for AIM. Let me provide some context behind this. I'm coming up on episode 100 of my podcast, and I'm just so grateful to say I've just interviewed some absolutely incredible humans. And the question at the beginning of every single one of my shows, if you listen to like the music, it's like, how can entrepreneurs like you and me, who have a vision for our lives and aren't willing to settle for anything less, how can we become financially successful and have a big impact while prioritizing our happiness, health, and relationships? So that's been at the core of every single episode that I've ever produced. And I realized in studying all these different stories and doing the deep dive in all these people that there are three characteristics that all these successful but fulfilled entrepreneurs have, and it falls into these three things, which spells AIM. So it stands for alignment, impact, and monetization. And what I realized is that it's actually a triangle. And so I'm going to try to explain this very soon. So if you imagine like a triangle drawn, in the bottom left-hand corner, you have alignment, A. At the peak of it, you have impact, I. And at the bottom, bottom right, you have monetization, right? AIM. And then it's a cycle, because you start by taking aligned action that creates an impact that you want to create, and then that generates revenue, which allows you to invest in more aligned activities. And it's this ongoing cycle. And what I realize is that if you are missing one of those three components, it creates imbalance. So if you have alignment and impact, but you're not monetizing, it means you're fulfilled. You're really happy with things, but you just don't have the money to invest in more activities. And then the other two combinations, if you have the other two combinations, it means that you have money, but you're not fulfilled. And it stems from different sides. So if you have alignment and monetization, but you're not making a meaningful impact, the unfulfillment stems from you're not making a meaningful difference in the lives of the people that you care about. And then the last combination is if you have impact and monetization, but no alignment, it means your unfulfillment is stemming from not using your gifts and your purpose the way you know you could. So it's interesting because it's like, as you go throughout different cycles, the first cycle you ever take of your business, you probably haven't nailed all three, but you have to go through a few cycles to realize, okay, that I didn't like the work that I was doing, so I had to take more aligned action, or I wasn't serving people in the way that I could, so I have to change the way that I'm thinking about impact. And so I love what you said there, Casey, because it's like the first time that you went through that cycle, you were like, man, like what's next? Like I don't even know how I can move forward from here. But I think that that's actually part of it, is that you can't get more alignment without action. You have to go through a cycle and realize, oh shit, that didn't really work out. And I had to figure out a more aligned version of this. And so the more you go through that, the more it allows you to find a business that brings you fulfillment and the monetization that you're looking for.
And then the goal is to fill in the triangle and then make the triangle bigger. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, I can go the really esoteric version of it, but like I'll keep, like, because if you look at it, there's this concept by Perry Marshall, which I would highly recommend anyone checks out, but he calls it the tactical triangle. And I realized that the structure of this triangle, it mimics the triangle that I built. So if you picture this triangle in the middle, there's 80-20. So there's 20, there's a 20% of aligned activities that are going to yield 80% of the results, right? And it's actually fractal in nature, which means that you can zoom in and zoom out and the pattern will still be there. So like you can look at AIM from a really big perspective. Like, what I talked about, my vision is to create a more deeply connected world. So that's a really big aim, but you can also zoom in, and a smaller version of that would be me running a podcast, because that's an aligned action that's creating an impact and monetizing for me. And inside of that, there's, the research that I do, that is an aligned action that creates impact that monetizes. So it can be as big as you want, or it can be as narrow as you want. And the key is doing this cycle more and more until you get zoned in on the superpowers that you have that only you can perform, the 1% of activities that generate 99% of the results. So it's just constantly playing with bigger and smaller and zooming in. So yeah, it's kind of a crazy tool, but an interesting way of thinking about things.
I have like 4 tabs open right now on actionable items from this conversation 30 minutes in, which is where I need to be, right? Like, I got the tactile triangle. I got the conscious language. Like I have things to now follow up on, right? To your point, research. That was interesting. I have found, and Casey will agree with me, there's a lot of people in this hustle and entrepreneurs. It's like they say they're going to get part of an industry. They jump into the industry, and then for whatever reason, they stop becoming a steward of that industry, or they think they know it all, and it's like, no, there's so much information out there, especially online and talking with other people, that will help promote your business, right? Just because you got the T-shirt with the logo on it doesn't mean you're the subject matter expert day one. I even struggle.
They get complacent. I think they get complacent.
100%. My goal was to prove other people in this industry wrong constantly. And then I realized, well, shit, no, there's lots of different ways of doing this. And then I got out of my industry, to your part about the jar. I was like, oh, shit, there's a lot of other ways that other industries are doing things that make sense, and the way that people are doing things that make sense. And again, it's one of my mentors told me, right, if you copy everything from one person, it's plagiarism. If you copy everything from everybody, it's called research, right? And that's it. You got to take in all these bits of information, processes, and institute them in your business to create this business and this life you want. I love how much you're quoting others, because it shows that you're well studied, but it also shows that you're willing to say, hey, this is a starting point. This is a thought that I had, and let me bridge the gap so that I can promote healthy thought with others. This isn't like, hey, all things from Brandon's head, right? No, these are the body of work. Even in junk removal, very tactical. I'll be like, oh yeah, I learned this from this guy. There's this one guy, Ray Gagnon.
You become a vehicle.
You become a vehicle. There's a guy, Ray Gagnon, up in New York that he taught me years ago, right? There's no such thing as good news or bad news. There's new information and what you do with it. And that was one of those things that just impacted me on the level of, the first couple of years, especially when you're in junk removal or in any industry, it's like, you're almost like you're sitting there at a poker table and you're thinking that, oh, if I have good juju, it's going to work out. And if I have a bad attitude, it's not, right? You think you can control the cards, and all of a sudden there's good news, bad news. No. There's just new information. New things happen, and you have to be able to adapt and overcome, right? Do you double down or do you fold, right? Do you walk away or do you stay, right? And those are decisions in business. Some of the best relationships I had the first year or two, thinking, now I'm going to build my business around this, ended up being the most toxic or, costly relationships I had, because I didn't objectively renew, hey, what matters to me? Who to your point, aligns with my long-term vision? I had some people that, they paid me little from the start, and they thought, hey, that's going to be how it's going to be, because they got a good deal, or because I would bend over backwards for them. And over time, that didn't align. When it was just my brother and I, fine, we got paid. But all of a sudden, we got 12, 15, 20 employees and a mortgage and trucks. Well, I can't work just for beer money. And eventually those relationships go away.
So let me ask you a question. And what do you think? Okay, you're going to love this, Andy. So when you're that guy, right? When you're the person, when you're a vehicle for other people, you become their vehicle, right? Well, look at this industry. How do your guys treat your vehicle? How do they treat your truck? Like crap, because it's not their truck. So I found the same way. I became a vehicle for other people, but I wasn't theirs. I was my vehicle, but I was pretty much leasing myself to these other people. And in turn, I didn't get treated like I wanted to get treated because they were just using me to get from A to B. That was kind of it. There was really nothing in it for Casey. Now, I'm not saying there always has to be, but at some point in time, you have to feel some sort of value from others. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Y'all are literally using me just to pass through. That's it. I feel completely used like a vehicle.
Are you saying that from an employee standpoint, or customer, or vendor, or all people?
I'm saying in general. So, like, I have a veterans group, and I am very good at connecting people with other people. But I also noticed when I got out of my other business and started a new business, now I, in turn, needed help. I needed help from the outside. Hey, guys, I'm starting something new. My customer base is completely new. I'm having to figure shit out on my own here, and I could really appreciate the help. But I found that the most of my phone calls, most of my conversations were like, hey, man, look, I'm really needing this person, or I'm really needing this service, or I'm really needing this. And then after they got that person or service, I wouldn't hear from them. But then when it came time for me, it's like, hey, man, I really need this person. It's like, I really don't know, man. Maybe check this website. And it's like, it felt like, and I'm not saying it's always like this, I mean, it may sound a little confusing, but I think in general, when you become that, not just referral guy, but the connector, you're a vehicle and you're just getting used like a vehicle.
Because those relationships are transactional. So, Brandon, I'd love to hear, right? How do you go from transactional relationships to relationships that transcend the business, transcend, right, the transaction, and really become a personal connection where both individuals find value? How do you do that?
That's a great question. The first thing I think is really important to think about is be very observant of your energy level in conversations. And like I'm very mindful of, like, if I make an introduction for someone, like, how are they handling it? Like, were they expressing gratitude for it? Did they follow up right away? Did they drop the ball on it? Because it's like every connection I
laziness
make,
or something on there.
Yeah. Like, every connection I make, it's like, lots of people that come on my show, it's like I spent 5 hours of research on them. I've interviewed them, and then I find out what they need help and support with. And then they'll say, oh, I need help with this. I'm like, okay, I know someone. I'll go check with that person and make sure the introduction's okay. Make sure it's a double opt-in introduction and make the introduction. It's not something that just happens, And then so I introduced a guy that he said he was looking at getting another podcast, and it was a perfect fit. And then he didn't show up for the show. And it's like, I can't continue that relationship with him anymore. And it's one of those things you just got to be aware of that. You can't and so it's part like being okay with that happening, but also like you have to be careful when it does happen. You have to be mindful to not allow yourself to continue on that. So I think that's
separating friends from business associates. Like, you're a good dude. I like you, but I just probably won't go into business with you.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about that. But to answer your question about transactional versus transformational relationships, there is a concept that is called Dream 100. Are you guys familiar with Dream 100? Have you heard of it?
Break it down, Barney style.
So basically, the idea came from a guy named Chet Holmes, and he wrote the book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And the idea was that, what if I built a list of, if I created a dream list of 100 people, and if I had a relationships with these 100 people, it would absolutely transform my life. Like they could be strategic partners, it could be clients or vendors. It's like, if you had a relationship with these people, it would change the game. And the way that he taught it was like, you just got to relentlessly pursue these people until they do business with you. There's several flaws with this thinking and the way that it's been taught over time, in my opinion. The first of which is that you build a list of 100 people, and it's called the Dream 100. So the first people that people put on the list is like, well, let me put on Tony Robbins as number one. And like, it's like, most people dream of these really big people, or like Brian Scudamore, 1-800-GOT-JUNK. It's like you think about these people, it's like you don't have a way of adding value for them. It's just like, it's a dream on a list. And that's the second thing that's wrong with it, is that it's just a list. Like it's a list, and you're trying to use this list so that you can get further ahead, right? So I have a concept that I call the Giver's Handbook, and it's similar in nature, but it's different in the way that it's operated, in the sense that I heard about this, again, just my brain citing a billion different people. Brian Kurtz has this concept called 100-0. And the idea is that so many of our relationships, it's like you want to keep track, right? It's like, oh, I gave you this, you give me this in return. And it's just like, whatever. But Brian's concept is 100-0. It's like, I'm just going to give 100% and not expect anything in return, and good things are going to happen. There's a caveat to that, is that if you are giving to the wrong people, you will get taken advantage of, right? So you do have to have discernment. So
I've been there.
When I talk, yeah, exactly. So yeah, so the key is really, you want to be intentional about the people that you want to connect with, but you also have to come from the perspective of supporting them. So there's a level of filtration, of discernment and observation. Like maybe somebody was on your list that you want to give to and support, and things will come back years later, but you know, over time of giving to them, you realize that there's an issue and you can't continue with that. So I think there is a high level of intentionality of investing in people that have the potential of having transformational relationships. Because if you're dealing with the transactional all the time, it's never going to transcend that. So the discernment of understanding who you want to give to, because once you give to the right person, massive things comes as a result of it. There's like, you know, Casey and Andy, without even asking you, I guarantee you wouldn't be here today if there wasn't some human that saw something in you or supported you or gave you some kind of inspiration to go and do the thing. So it's like our evolution always comes from connection, but like you said, you have to be mindful of those people that you give to. But when you have the right people to give to, you can give unconditionally. But it's just developing systems and the understanding that that's not always going to happen 100% of the time.
So how do you, what are some things you use in particular to scrub that?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously if someone doesn't follow through on their obligations or doesn't show up to your podcast, like those are obvious ones, but are there some things that or tricks that you use? Because that's the other challenge I see when you first get into business is like, you're fresh fish, right? You walk into that chamber or you walk into a convention and everyone knows you're the new guy, and they either attack you or they don't talk to you at all.
Yeah.
Right. And it goes both ways. Right. So what are some things that you do? Let's talk about how do you disqualify, or what are some things or leading indicators with people that aren't going to be a good relationship for you? And then what are some things that you do so that you do get the relationships, right? With maybe not the Mark Cubans and, you know, Gary V's of the world, but people within your industry that want to, or choose to, right? Get rid of your word want, I like it.
Yeah.
Conscious language, right? That choose to promote those within the industry. So let's talk about leading indicators on not good relationships, and what are things you see when people choose to invest in others?
I think I kind of alluded to part of it already, and that's like, you have to think about how you feel after an interaction. Like, do you feel more drained or more energized after you interacted with them? Like, you kind of have a sense of how that feels, and that's a part of your brain that you don't really fully understand. So that's kind of like a weird thing. If there's something that feels off, but it's not worth to completely discard the relationship, I'll continue a little bit more. But I think that's my first gut check is like, do I feel more energized after this conversation, or do I feel less? And you're not going to get it 100% of the time, right? Like sometimes you have to spend some more time with someone before you realize, okay, like maybe this doesn't make sense. You just kind of politely, you know, phase off or whatever it is. So that's kind of the art side of the connections. You know, it's like there's really, I maybe I can think about it a little bit more, but I think that's mostly how I think about it is like, you know, Are they grateful for what I did? Are they, you know, yeah. So I think the energy is it, but the tactical side of it, the science of it, I know you wanted to talk about the magic connection method. So like I can share this process that I use to connect with people. So the first thing that I always like to share is that if you open your email inbox right now, or your LinkedIn profile, or frankly, an in-person networking event, it's interesting because it's like, you can tell most people have an agenda, right? You know, it's like, or like you open your connection request, it's like, hey, Andy, I see you're wearing a green shirt. You know, that's their level of customization. And it's like, you know, buy my shit. It's like, or it's like, there's no eloquence. And it's like, or another thing is they think that they need to make themselves sound really important. Like, hi, I do X, Y, Z. I'm the owner of blah, blah, blah. I had one person send me a message once. It was like, it was like, I got the feeling it's like, I have chosen to reach, like, I'm so important, but I have taken the time to send you a message, you lowly human being. And so it's interesting because it's like, it makes sense because you think that you like, yeah, I need to show that I establish credibility, but at the same time, how do you do that in a way that like doesn't intrude
talk down to your
listener
or whatever? Yeah.
Exactly. So I have a way of opening the relationship in a transformational way. And so this process that I teach is called the Magic Connection Method. Surprise, surprise, there's another acronym for it. Whenever you want to build a relationship, you want to think about the avenue that you're taking to build that relationship. So AVE is the acronym, and it stands for appreciation, value, and end with a question. The last one isn't necessarily one word, but appreciation, value, end with a question. So this is the process that I always use whenever I'm like, okay, maybe I have a giver's handbook, or like I have some people that I want to build relationships with. I don't have a relationship with right now. I want to reach out to them and build a relationship in a transformational way where I can add value to them, and we can actually have a conversation about how to build those relationships. And you'll find that this actually snowballs, because it's like lots of the people that have come on my show that are pretty big. It's like I've gotten referrals to other people, so it's like this is kind of a snowball. So I'll go through them one by one, and then you guys can kind of pause me and ask for clarification, or I'll leave some breathing room, or let people take a mental break from me vomiting 5 million words a minute. So the first one is appreciation. So you want to do the exact opposite of what everybody else does when they do that outreach, right? So you want to actually show that you take the time to care about them as a human being, right? So, and this requires research. Surprise, surprise. Like, you have to actually care about them. So like, and the way that you do that is being very specific. So a way that I might do that, and the way that anybody listening right now, if you were ever going to reach out to Andy or Casey, you could say, hey, Andy and Casey, I listened to episode 19 of the show. I loved when you talk about this specific part. Thank you so much for sharing. There is no way that could ever be copy and pasted to anybody else. And I see, for those that are listening, Casey and Andy are just nodding right now. Like, getting a message like that, you don't get sick of getting those kinds of messages. It's like, hey man, thank you so much for the value that you provided. Like, this is specifically what I took and what I implemented for this conversation. Like, boom, that's incredible. So that's the first thing you want to do, is you want to take the time to actually care about them. So another sub framework within this, if you want like an easier, even more applicable way of doing this, is loved plus specific. Loved XYZ, specifically liked it when XYZ. And the test that you have to pass is that if you can copy and paste this to another human being and it applies, you're not specific enough. Like, that's where people are like, there's this, all these bots out there, and they're like, okay, I should start the message with a compliment. And that's where you get these things where it's like these crappy bots that have like scraped. It's like, hi, Andy, I see that you're in the junk removal business, and then they jump into their thing. It's like, wow, look at the level of customization that you did there. So that's the first thing is the appreciation component, and it's got to be genuine. The next part is value. And so what you guys are doing that's so incredible with the podcast or anything like this is like you have a media platform that you can showcase and add value to someone inherently. So obviously, if you have something like that, it enhances it, but there's lots of value that you can provide in ways that don't have a show or whatever it is. So I'll give an example of the first ever job that I got right out of college. I ended up finding this really successful entrepreneur. His name was Jonathan Levy. At the time, he had 1 million downloads on his podcast, a TED Talk, 100,000 students in his online courses. And I was a 21-year-old college kid. And I was like, what do I do to reach out to this person to add value to him? And so I'll give you off the top of my head what that email was like when I reached out to him. So the first part was I appreciated him. It was like, hey man, I listened to the episode with Noah Kagan. I took it and I implemented this. This was the result. Thank you so much. Right. So I showed that I cared. But the next part is like, I did some research on, I subscribed to your email newsletter. I checked out your site, and I found 3 specific projects that I would love to help and support you with. And I put them together in like a document or whatever it is. So it's like, I took the time to do that research, and I want to help you execute on this. And I don't want to be paid for it. That was actually the first message that I sent him, is like, if you like my ideas, we can find out a way to work together. But if not, like, I didn't take anything and we can just part our separate ways. So that was the value. It was like an irresistible offer. It's like, I did all this research on him, and I showed him that I can add value. And that one email actually turned into me working with him for 3 years. I ended up running his marketing for his company with 250,000 students. Jonathan got me into this high-level group called Genius Network with 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs, and I was the 22-year-old kid getting to interact with them, working with Jonathan. It all came from one email of me thinking about the value that I could provide to him first, right? And so think about it as who are these humans that you want to connect with, and what are the ways that you could support them and add value to them, and how can you articulate that in a way that shows that you are coming from a place of adding value to them. So that's the V. Is there anything you guys want to say before I continue on the last part?
No, well, I'm loving it. Oh, go ahead, Case.
I just want to say, because this is amazing. Like, this is stuff I had to learn the hard way in the business, because I was like reaching out to just random big wigs, because for me, I was just trying to get out there, man, just trying to get in front of people. And I realized the more personal approach I took, the better my returns were. So like, instead of just copy and paste and like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, let's get coffee. I noticed that, like, for instance, Amazon, when I got those big jobs for Amazon, it's because I started looking into who these people were, where they were, and if they're local, not just calling a number, not just emailing anybody. And I started, hey, I noticed you're in the military. Well, that's great, because I also was in the military, and this is kind of what I do now. And I'd love to talk more, about whatever, but it's crazy he's saying all this, because like 6 years ago, man, I would have been like all over this, because I was trying to figure out, how do I talk to these people that in my mind were like, oh, I got better shit to do than talk to this nobody.
Yeah, and think about it too. I'll just encourage you to think about this. Like, if you're like, wow, this is a lot of work. Yes, it is a lot of work, but you have to think about it from the perspective of some of these relationships have multiplicative exponential value in your life, So it's like, think about this from the perspective of like, who are like key strategic partnerships in your business that if you had them and they were referring you, this isn't like you're going to send a Magic Connection method email to every person you want to remove junk from their house. That doesn't make sense. But like, if you're going to build a relationship with the people that are going to refer you business for every single year for forever, like that's a pretty important relationship that you could establish, or some of your vendors or whatever it may be. So think about it from that perspective. Go ahead, Andy.
And so last episode, we talked about this. Last episode, Casey broke it down into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 3 are transactional. Tier 2 are vendors where you're working together. And tier 3 are people that are going to transcend beyond your business.
Tier 1,
It's going to be about you as a human. And so what we talked about is when you first start in business, you spend a lot of your time in that tier 3 category, right? And also you treat some people, like your employees, as a tier 3. You treat them as transactional versus treating them like someone that you want to be with you in perpetuity. And so you have to spend time in all 3 buckets, right? You can't just be totally academic, philosophical, living in tier 1, like, oh, I'm going to be cool with everybody, right? You need some people that are going to monetize, or where they're going to buy the thing that you monetize in whatever the capacity that is. Even in your case, right? If you're selling marketing, right, you need ultimately people that are going to buy marketing services or podcasting services from you. It can't just be awesome, great connections, right? You have to have all 3. So when you talk about the magical connection, this is what I really wanted to talk about in this episode. I'm glad we got to it. Is how do you get those tier 1 relationships? What time do you put into them, right? I'm not saying spend 40 hours a week, right? But you're saying 5-6 hours of research. You're adding value. You're giving first, right? Can you do that once a week, once a month, once a quarter? And then what's that exponential value you're going to see? There's a gentleman I know in the Milwaukee area, and I was at a networking event with him one time. And I sat at a table, and there were like 6 people at the table. I was like, oh, I know all you people, right? I'm going to go find another table with someone I don't know, right? Because I believe this adage of, oh, if you're at a table with everybody you know, go to another table, right? Which is kind of tier 2 thinking. If I know them all as vendors. And he looked at me, he goes, do you want access to everybody in my phone book? And I go, well, yeah. He goes, okay. You don't get access if you don't put the work in. If you put the work in connecting with me, you've just doubled your phone book, because I'm going to go out and go to bat for you the same way I go to bat for my own organization. I'm going to speak to that. But if you don't spend time with me, there's no reason I would ever do that. Right. And then now this is person that he actually watches our show. He comments, right? He participates on a transactional basis because we have that tier 1 relationship, and he's supporting and has supported what I've done because I went on my way to find him, to your point. And thankfully he gave me the answers to the test, like, hey, idiot, don't fucking move, sit here, take time with me, versus what you're saying, which is go find that person, right? And put work in before you meet them. So I'm just to this point, because when you first start in junk removal or in the industry, this is the last thing they're thinking about, which is how do I give to others? How do I take time to research others? Right? Because you're like, no, how do I pay my bills tomorrow? Right?
Yeah,
that's where your head's at.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was just kind of, as you were speaking, thinking about your event that I had the chance to go to, thinking about the tables that were there. And it's like, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation today, why I feel so grateful to hang out with you guys. It's like, hey, I saw Andy was putting together a cool event, and I reached out to him and said, hey, man, I appreciate everything that you're doing and showing up to the event, and I'm going to learn some cool people. And then Andy's like, you want to come on the show, But it's like, it didn't come from like, let me pitch Andy on coming on a show or like try to, And so like maybe I'll continue, like now that I've met Andy and Casey, we just continue to hang out, and as we figure out to support each other, maybe there's some ways I can support young guns and stuff that Andy's got going on. You never know where things go, but it comes from wanting to show up and add value. Yeah.
I've already earmarked you as a speaker for next year because I want to provide what you have to a wider audience. And that's it, right? It's about when I put on Young Guns events for our listeners, I put on a quarterly 4-hour event. It's about education, opportunity, and access, right? That's it. That's what and I put those on events like, hey, who do I want to hear from? Right? Selfishly, I'm like, hey, who do I want to learn from? And another one of my mentors, I can't recall who said this, but whatever. They said for every mentor you have that's 10 years older than you got to have a mentor that's 10 years younger than you.
Yep.
Right. And like, I look at you as like, man, you got the whiz bang shit we call in the military, right? You got all the high speed new shit while Casey and I are already kind of old and crusty, right? So we can stay old and crusty,
hey, man.
Or we can stay young by surrounding ourselves with individuals that have a young mindset, even young guns. Mm-hmm. Someone said, hey, how old is too old? I said, well, that's subjective, right? We have somebody that's 58.
Yeah.
That's on our team as young guns because they're young in their mind. I've also met 30-year-olds that are stuck in their way. Mm-hmm. So it's like young is a frame of mind. So with respect to time, let's jump in. Let's close out the conversation on the Magic Connection because that's the secret sauce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So I'll just give people a recap. So you remember we're following AVE. You're taking an avenue to this relationship. So you showed up, you appreciated them, you found out a way to add value. The last thing that you want to do is you want to end with a question. So many people they make things way too like book a call with me. Here's my calendar link or whatever, and it's like like I don't even really know. It feels so forced, So it's like mm-hmm. you want people to lean in and see if they're interested. So I've experimented with a bunch of different ways that you can end with a question. The way that I traditionally teach, I learned it from Chris Voss. He was an ex-FBI hostage negotiator. He wrote the book Never Split the Difference. And this is the dude that's in the basement, or he's on the phone with a lunatic in the basement of a bank about to blow up the whole place. Like, what do you say to that guy to not make him do something crazy? And he talks about this concept of a no-oriented question, which is really interesting because when you think about it, every single day we have a finite amount of yeses that we can give. Because what does it mean when you say yes to something? Every time you say yes, you're giving away your time, you're giving away your money, you're giving away your energy, you're giving away something whenever you say yes. On the opposite side of that, saying no makes you feel secure, it makes you feel safe. So like it's a lot easier to say no. So an example of a no-oriented question, like we're going back to my example with Jonathan. It's like, hey, appreciated the thing you did with Noah. I came up with these things I could do to support you. 100% up to you, but would you be opposed to me sending over a Google Doc that shared the ways that can help you? So I'm not necessarily asking, hey, let's book a call or let's do the thing. It's like, here's the value I thought of providing to you. 100% up to you, but would you be interested in like checking it out? So I'm not even like pushing forward for something big. Another person on my show that's helped me actually create all these acronyms and a way to package my idea, Michael Roderick, he talks about an indirect versus a direct ask. If you ask someone for something directly, it's like, there's that moment of like, oh, I don't, it's like I'm asking you, you're taking my food. Like, and now I have to make this decision, right? It's kind of like this fight or flight response. So, Michael, we're actually working on some stuff for his stuff, but like the way that you could also use this or end with a question, it's like, 100% up to you, but what are your thoughts on this? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on XYZ. And so it's like, you're not hard closing someone, but it's like, look at all what you did right here. You showed up, you showed that you cared, you look for a way to add value to them. And then you're just like, are you interested in this? 100% up to you. Do you want me to send you this doc that I put together with tons of thought in it? So it's like, if I were to reach out to come on this show, a way I could do this is like, hey, Andy and Casey, I listened to episode 14, loved this, XYZ. Because you're so focused on helping your audience jump into the trash and junk removal business, I came up with 3 specific ways or 3 specific topics that I think might be super relevant for your audience. And I put it together in a Google Doc for you to check out. 100% up to you, but would you be opposed to me for you to send over the doc for you to check out? I'm not asking to come on the show, but it's like, hey, I'm showing that I care, that Andy and Casey care about you listening right now, right? Like they're investing their time, energy, money to create content for you. So I want to make sure that I'm in alignment with that. So like that is that is how anybody can open the door to these incredible relationships. AVE, appreciation, value, and end with a question.
No, that is. I mean, there's been a lot of nuggets throughout this entire episode, but that is something actionable today that I'm going to take, right? As you're talking about, I'm thinking about the people that I need to increase my connection with or build a connection with, and even our listenership out there. Take the time, invest the time into yourself, your business, and others, so that you're not stuck in the truck, right? That's really our theme comes back to how to not be stuck on the truck. And this is a simple, executable model, right? Where you're going out and you're putting the work in, but you're putting the work in long-term, investing with the idea that, you know what, it might not work out. And you got to be comfortable with that. You know, it's like the challenge with a lot of entrepreneurs is like, they take this huge risk to become a business owner, and then once they become a business owner, they have something to lose. They stop risking it.
Yep.
And in your case here, right? If you put an hour or two research into this person, this opportunity, and it doesn't pan out, okay. But I would argue that this methodology will pan out more than if you send out 100 random generic emails, right? Where you put a 1 minute effort into it because you changed their name. Or because you built a CRM system where it triggers and inserts name and puts in generic transactional language.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing on this, and then I do have to jump here because I have another call coming up. But like if I, it goes back to 100-0. So it's like I've had Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank on my show, and like I'll explain how this happened. It's like I had a hypnotist on the show. And he was an incredible interview. I spent my research on him, and he was like, "Hey, I know somebody else you should have on your show. His name is Waldo Wallman. He's a decorated air fighter pilot, New York Times bestselling author. I'll introduce you to him." So I interview Waldo Wallman, epic interview where he's talking about getting shot down by a massive missile. It's just really adrenaline pumping thing. And he loved the energy and effort that I put into appreciating him and taking the time on his research. And he's like, "Hey, I'm really good friends with Kevin Harrington. Do you want Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank on your show?" Then I get Kevin from Shark Tank. It's like, hell yeah, I'll take that introduction. Or in a few weeks from now, I'm actually interviewing the guy that invented the cell phone. Legit. He's 93 years old. He's still alive and kicking. And like, this came from another person that I reached out to, and I added value by being on their show. And she's like, I interviewed the guy that invented the cell phone. Do you want that interview? I was like, hell yeah, I'll take that interview. So like, all these things come in really strange ways, but you have to think long-term perspective. You have to think transformational. Never did I imagine that I was doing that interview with Waldo to get a connection with Kevin Harrington. Never did I think I was doing that other interview to get a connection with the guy that invented the cell phone. But time and time again, after investing in these relationships, I found that these keep coming back. And so it does take patience. It does take an investment, but I would just highly encourage anybody to think about those relationships that way. And you just have to be willing to take the high level perspective that it'll come back if you show up the right way. All
right, there you go. Invest in your relationships, invest in yourself, challenge the way that you see yourself and your business as how do you fit in the puzzle and what pieces do you want to be next to? And what puzzle, what life are you building? Because you don't know how it's all going to come together. But put the time in, invest in relationships, use the magic connection method, use everything you've learned here today. This has been an amazing episode, Brandon. Thank you so much. I will be following up with you to do Young Guns and other things, and also
epic.
Whatever. Everything you're saying is things that are actionable that I choose to invest my time in, because we're not going to use the word want or need, and that's going to drive me mad.
Love that.
Anyways, all right, that's a total side note. Like, that definitely stuck in my head. So, hey, Brandon, thank you so much for being on. For episode 24 of the Trash Talk Business Podcast, I'm Andy Weins. This has been Casey Bubba Lawrence. This has been another great episode. Thank you so much, Brandon, for being on, and we'll see you next week.
Appreciate you guys.